I like to remind people that there are individuals in the United States, large groups in the United States, even a movement in the United States, which rejects the policy of our government and understands that we as US citizens have more in common with people in Iran, people in Trinidad, people in Venezuela, people in Syria, people in Palestine, average people everywhere. We have more in common with them than we do with the elites of our country, and we understand that, and we have the same enemy, which are the ruling class, the banks, the industry, and the politicians they control in Washington, which have wreaked havoc on the rest of the world for decades.
Welcome to another episode of Independent Thought and Freedom, where we have conversations with some of the most interesting people around the world who are shaking up politics, society, economies, and ideas. We've had some amazing guests on this program, including The Saker, Paul Craig Roberts, Sheikh Imran Hussein, E. Michael Jones, Cynthia McKinney, and more. If you'd like to support us to reach our next goal of actually putting together live events where we bring some of my best guests side by side on one stage, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber on Patreon. You'll find the link below. Also, if you are an author or researcher with important ideas to share with the world and want to have a greater impact, I'm offering a free masterclass, 3 steps on how to leverage your intellectual authority to become a media personality. The link for that class is in the description as well. And now, on to this week's show. Welcome to Independent Thought and Freedom. The term fake news has become one of the most important concepts and rhetorical weapons of the 21st century. It started as a way to denigrate alternative and non-mainstream voices, to silence so-called conspiracy theorists, whether on the right or the left. But then Donald Trump turned it around on the establishment itself in a brilliant maneuver. The fight over information, what is propaganda, what is truth, who should be trusted and who shouldn't be, is central to political life today. Today, I'm pleased to have a vibrant, young, and already distinguished voice in the alternative media space, Anya Parampil. Anya Parampil is the host of Red Lines at the GrayZone, an independent US media site based in DC. She's also the former host and correspondent for RT America. Welcome, Anya.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Kirk, and for that very kind introduction.
Oh, no, you deserve it fully. How's the COVID-19 lockdown or the quarantine in your area of the world, by the way?
Well, in Washington, we are under a sort of lockdown officially. Restaurants are only open for carry-out, which even disturbs me because I worry that a lot of those workers, of course, it's good that they haven't lost their jobs, but they're really on the front line of this, and I fear are going to be exposed to the spread of COVID-19 because in the United States, I'm sure you've heard, Kirk, there has been almost no federal response. This whole situation has exposed the fact that we don't really have a functioning federal government. And that goes for the executive and the legislative branch. Today, Congress passed a pretty weak economic stimulus bill, which is essentially a pay into large corporations and insurance that they won't go broke during this crisis. And then some workers will be receiving a very meager stipend, about $1,200, which won't cover rent, for example, in places like Washington, D.C. So we have the president saying that he wants to restart the economy and bring it back by Easter, when experts and governors, leaders in other places in the country are saying we should expect to be dealing with this crisis for 9 months. So I'm very disturbed. I'm worried that a lot of people in the United States are going to die unnecessarily. It's almost impossible to get tests. So I don't think we have the true numbers regarding coronavirus in the United States. I read an article today about an elderly man in his 70s who was denied a test 3 times. in Kansas before he passed away this week, and after he was confirmed to have contracted coronavirus, and he was sent home again 3 times by medical professionals because they said he didn't fit the high standards needed to require a test, even though he was a high at-risk individual merely based on his age. His wife said he was subject to immeasurable suffering, and that she and her family, their children and their grandchildren, could only watch from afar while their loved one passed away in really horrid conditions in the United States. And I'm very concerned that we're only going to see more stories like that as the U.S. government fails to respond and continues to put the economy over average people.
Yeah, and I mean, and even non-COVID related deaths will be increasing, because I mean,
Yes.
I had a situation just in my own family where a younger cousin of mine he needed some health services, and and it was just deemed non-essential, and and 2 days ago
It's
he passed
worrying.
away. Yeah, it was terrible.
Your cousin did.
Yeah.
Because of
The restrictions, he couldn't get the treatment, and so it's
I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah, it's terrible. It's really terrible. But with and I know this is a world historic event, and I'm sure this is going to be part of your sort of repertoire of issues that you'll be tackling. I'm certain of it from what you've been talking about. You obviously, and rightly so, very interested in the impact of this. I first noticed you on Tucker Carlson. You were amazing on that. I mean, you really knocked it out of the park. That was excellent, talking about Venezuela. And right here in Trinidad and Tobago, we're right next door to Venezuela, only 7 miles away. And we have been taking in the largest number of refugees on a per capita basis since the crisis started. So it's something that's very, very, very relevant to us. It's not just a theoretical issue.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that yeah, you were really, really amazing in your analysis and just your presentation of your criticisms. But I'm just interested, how did that come about?
Well, I get this question a lot privately, and it's funny. When I was a correspondent for RT America, I was sent to Helsinki to cover the Trump-Putin historic summit, which I was very hopeful for as a U.S. American who would like to see improved relations with Russia based on common sense. That was an aspect of Trump's platform when he was running for president, which I thought was a positive addition to the conversation, even though I didn't necessarily trust him or believe that he would carry out all of his promises. And as we've seen, that meeting and any relations between Russia and the United States are completely out the door. It's been sabotaged mainly by people that Trump surrounded himself with, such as National Security Advisor John Bolton. But I was still very hopeful and excited to go to Helsinki to cover this summit. And as a correspondent for RT America, I was kind of excluded from the press corps, the clique, the Washington and White House correspondents, which had all traveled to Helsinki as well in order to cover this event. And they were so disgusted by the whole thing, reacting, saying, this is treasonous. I can't believe the president of the United States is sitting down with the Russian president. I mean, these people are so nationalistic and vile. And they're supposed to be reporters. They're supposed to be taking international affairs seriously, but they come in with this very ham-fisted imperialist mindset.
And just to even interrupt, sorry there. I don't even think they're truly nationalistic. They just hate Trump. I mean, it's not that they were always. All of a sudden they hate Russia. All of a sudden, it's really something.
But they do really believe in this American exceptionalism and the idea that the U.S. is the great actor on the world stage. It can't do anything wrong. But one of the only people, if not, the only person I met during that entire summit who I had anything in common with as a reporter was Tucker Carlson. He was there. I think he ended up doing an interview with President Trump during that meeting, but we were all sequestered in this area, you know, where the press would get food and coffee during the summit. And I met him there, and we just kind of got along. And so I stayed in touch with him, and I told him when I was in Venezuela about what I was seeing there and how much of a mistake I felt US policy was, and how misdirected it was, and how it was destined to fail, and how it was leading to more suffering. And he invited me onto his show when I got back, but then breaking news pushed it, and it ended up being perfect, because then on April 30th, when Juan Guaido, the US appointed puppet of Venezuela, led this failed military uprising where he had about 1530 something or other, something like that, or so odd soldiers with him in the street, and again completely failed the way US policy had been and continues to do. And that day, April 30th, Tucker invited me on his show, and it was just ideal timing, because Venezuela, I think at that point and throughout the entire coup attempt, that was the day that mainstream media was most focused on the issue. And he was the only one willing to bring someone on to say that it was wrong and to denounce sanctions. And I wasn't the only segment critical of US policy that he included in his show that day. But from there, it just kind of exploded and took on a life of its own. The next day I woke up and I was getting hundreds of messages from all over Latin America. It had been translated into Spanish. It led to me eventually getting invited to go and talk in places such as Honduras, because this clip, it was so important for, I think, people in Central and South America and the Caribbean to see that not only was there a reporter like me who was going around the region and trying to provide a different perspective in the United States, plenty of other people do that, but a major cable news show in the United States, in fact, the #1 show, the most popular show in the country, was willing to include this perspective. I think it shows kind of where this country is at. I believe most people in this country think the way I do and think the way Tucker Carlson does on some of these more critical foreign policy issues.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's something I want to talk about a little bit more, about this whole right-left fake dichotomy. In fact, you know, we talk about fake news, but there's this fake division that's actually dividing people that have common interests. But because you have these fake issues that are dividing people into a kind of fake right and fake left, it really prevents people from coming together on important issues. But even the personal story is fascinating as well. I mean, did you begin your journey as a news reporter with RT?
I did, yes. Yeah. I actually dropped out of university. I moved to Washington, D.C. to study international relations at George Washington University, which is the Elliott School. The International Affairs School is literally across the street from the State Department. It's a direct pipeline into the Foreign Service office. And because I was always interested in international affairs and passionate about following world events, that's just the line that I followed when I graduated from high school and was looking to decide where I wanted to go after Michigan. I was in Ann Arbor. And so GW made sense. And while I was really interested in a lot of the history and being in the middle of empire on campus, I was really alienated from my classmates and from my professors and from the overall curriculum, the kind of indoctrination that was going on there, in order to train people who really did want to be willing servants of empire. And so on a whim, at a certain point, I sent my resume to RT, and I had a lot of experience, even though I was pretty young, in editing and writing. I was editor of a school paper, things like that. So they called me in for an internship position. And I was really lucky, because that internship position was to work on the show Breaking the Set with Abby Martin, which was a show that I enjoyed personally a lot. And Abby was someone that I really looked up to. And from there, it was just such a good fit that I ended up quitting school, working at RT full-time as a producer. And then when Abby's show ended, they made me a correspondent, and then I was an anchor, and really that's where I learned how to do journalism. Not that it was so difficult to do. I think in the US we have this idea, and in a lot of countries, that you need a fancy journalism school degree in order to become a reporter. But in some ways, I found that the reporters who have gone through that training, that's how you learn to be one of those objective, both sides, kind of down the line reporter, where you end up missing the story, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think there's such thing as objectivity. If you are looking at situations in an objective way, then you might be discounting somebody's suffering, or you might be discounting actual power structures. So,
and certainly the mainstream media now has discarded any pretense of objectivity. I mean,
exactly.
it doesn't
so
exist
how are
there
they
at all.
objective?
Yeah, exactly. They're quite open about their agendas, you know. So yeah. So was RT? Where was the headquarters actually? Was it Washington or
was
New York?
in DC actually. RT America.
Are they still there? Because you know all this sort of Russiagate, and then foreign media houses. I don't know. Did they have to like register as a foreign interest? You know all this kind of Russophobia.
Yes, I was there. I was there at RT when they were forced to register as a foreign lobbying organization under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, something that the U.S. government had never forced Al Jazeera or the BBC or France 24 to do. And unfortunately, RT took the path of least resistance and registered. And to your question is whether or not they're still there. They're still in their offices working, but they kind of made this decision to start. And if you look at RT America, RT International is a completely different animal. It's based in Moscow. It's still doing great reporting on the international issues and on Europe and all of that. But RT America, if you look at it, it's become essentially mainstream, wannabe Fox News almost, but not quite with the same talent or quality. It's really taken a more right-wing and mainstream direction, which is disappointing for me and many of the other people who I know who used to work there and also who used to watch it, because in a way it feels as though the US government was successful in muzzling it a bit. They became afraid to cover politics. They became afraid to take really aggressive positions on US affairs because they were worried that they were going to be shut down.
Yeah.
And so it's really sad.
I was really curious about the way, the politics of the station was kind of unfolding, because, Russia under Putin is not a left-wing country. And it's conservative in many ways. He's embraced Orthodox Christianity and yet RT America was like really left. It was really progressive. It was and to me it did not seem necessarily to be in alignment with Kremlin policy at all.
Exactly.
Kremlin policy was nationalistic and RT America, it seemed that being outside of America, there's probably I'm guessing that there's another station that I'm not aware of that maybe has I can't remember his last name again, but Tom
Hartman.
Yeah, Tom Hartman, Abby Martin. I don't know if Lee Camp would it be, but it seemed like they were on a couple. RT was just one outlet. Am I right? Yeah. Was there this kind of sort of syndicated content in a sense?
Tom Hartman's show was independent of RT, yes. Okay. But Abby's show and Lee Camp's show, which is still there, were produced in-house. And it's true that RT for a time was really a haven of left-wing, progressive, and even libertarian. If they were going to do the right-wing slant, it was more libertarian, outside of the box thinking on the network's programming. And yeah, it was completely independent of the Kremlin. That's what people who want to label it as Kremlin propaganda really don't understand. There was never any direction from anyone in Moscow regarding our programming, that's for sure. And that's why it's just sad to see that pressure from the US government has led to it kind of, instead of being right-wing alternative media. It's just right-wing kind of Fox reject media now. And it's just, I scroll through it now and I don't really recognize. I mean, there are still a few great people there. Lee's still there. There are good reporters such as
Max
Michelle
Kaiser show.
Stein, people
I
like
really,
that, but it's just not what it used to be.
Yeah.
And the politics, it was really, at the end of the day, all influenced now by the US government and the fact that they're living in fear.
Yeah.
I would say, screw them. I'm going to keep doing this thing, because that's what made RT popular, right?
Yeah.
Was the fact that it was doing, and leadership changed also. When RT was really popular during the Occupy phase and Abby and all these people were brought in, that was a different leadership phase too. Now, the person who's led the network, and to give them credit and not to erase the fact that he did bring in many traditionally RT lined people such as myself, he's taken now more of a mainstream direction, and that's just the nature of media. If you're gonna, and there's not so much of a difference between state-run and corporate media in that sense. Things change from one day to the next. You can be the treasured and popular host one day that's nothing because of the way the winds changed within the broader network. That's just the nature of it.
Right. Now you were in the questionnaire I had asked you to just outline a few things. You'd mentioned something interesting about leaving RT, and it taught you a lesson that you should never sacrifice your core beliefs. You want to elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I already kind of hinted to people. It's no secret that RT's programming direction changed at RT America. Anybody who watched, I mean, so many people ask me anyway, like, what happened there? Why doesn't it look like the network that it used to be?
Yeah.
And it is true that as a result of pressure from the US government, RT transitioned into a more mainstream right-wing. I don't know if they thought they were appealing to the Trump administration or what, but it wasn't going to work in their favor, I don't think. I think RT, as long as it's R for Russia, T in the United States, it's doomed unless it just, does what it's really good at, which is provide alternative programming. But there reached a point where it became clear to me that I was not going to be able to do what I wanted to do the way I wanted to do it and the way that I had been doing it for years. And it was really, really, really awful and painful. And I don't want to get into the details, but eventually when I left, it was hard, because if I had just gone along with the program and shut up, I could have kept making a really nice salary. I could have kept traveling the world through this company and and reaping in the opportunities that it was providing. But when I left, and I was really not sure what would come next, it was just really special timing. The GrayZone my partner, or my husband now, Max, he founded the GrayZone several years ago, and around the time that I was leaving RT, we just thought, look, he was like, if you're out of work and all of this news is popping up in Venezuela, a place that we're both really interested in, let's go as the GrayZone team. And so Max, Ben Norton, Aaron Mate, and myself were able to kind of pile some resources together and go. And then once we were there, I mean, it was like a spark went off, and so many people in the US and around the region were paying attention to us and counting on us for information. And suddenly I was free, super free to do whatever I wanted. And I was getting rewarded by the public, by what people really truly wanted. And so I was kind of affirmed in my sense that, okay, I could have stayed and kind of sold out on my own beliefs. And it was scary for me not to do that, because I wasn't sure what was next. But because I was firm in what I wanted to do, kind of, you make your own luck. And I think that if you really believe in what you're doing, people will come to you. It's not always easy to get funding, or, I'm definitely not making anywhere near what I used to make, but it's worth it to stay true to what you really believe in, especially if you're a journalist. There's just no room for putting out content that you're uncomfortable with or that you don't stand behind 100%.
Yeah, because I mean that's definitely part of your appeal, definitely your strength. It's the passion for the stories that you're telling, and
That's what people always say. They're like, you have a lot of emotions about this. I'm like, sorry.
yeah. I mean, how I suppose you would describe yourself and the GrayZone as progressive. Is that right? Or
It's
what?
so hard
Yeah.
for what you've
Tell me.
already suggested to come up with a label, because I mean, in my view, progressive now, even in the US, is a meaningless term as much as left and right
Yeah.
really are. I don't know what it means to be part of the left in the United States. We don't really have one. There's so much of a history of especially anti-communism and just warped mentalities, generations of warped mentalities on the so-called US left, that at this point we're really disjointed. And I think there's still a really strong core of people out there, just average people, who don't consider themselves part of, left-wing media. I can't stand people who speak as though they or talk as though they speak for what left-wing media, or that they know what it means to be on the left. But average people who have maybe an awareness of where their political bends are, they still interact with us a lot. And so they are looking for guidance. And if there's any way that I would label kind of our audience and our team, especially in what, I don't know if this is what we would have described ourselves as a few years ago or months ago collectively, but definitely now I think the best word to use is anti-imperialist.
Yeah.
We are people who care deeply about people in the United States who are in some ways the first victims of the US empire, people in Baltimore, people in Chicago, in New York City, who live in neighborhoods that are completely abandoned, have no resources, no job opportunities whatsoever. Those people are abandoned and directly impacted by the fact our government would rather spend money abroad, propping up military bases all over the world and funding endless disastrous regime change wars. So making that connection, to me, is the most important issue that anybody in this country who cares about people here can make. Whether you're on the right or the left, at this stage, to me, is meaningless. There are definitely values on the right and the left that are common, and also that are very specific to people who would brand themselves on either side. And I fall more on the left. Even though I don't believe in open borders the way some people on the left might, I believe in migration and immigration, and I'm not someone who defaults to some of the more nationalistic or right-wing arguments about immigration. So issues like that, issues like women's rights, reproductive health, for example, which I know is a trickier issue in Central and Latin America, Central and South America, again. So because here in the US, we get people on the left who say, oh, well, look at the Sandinistas. They don't support abortion. They're very right-wing on these. Well, they have a completely different culture and history than us in the United States. So it's not fair for us as left-wing hippies to come down there and tell them what to do. So these are the kinds of, I don't know if that made sense bringing up that point.
Total sense.
These are the superficial divisions between right and left that I think I would rather work out these core issues, empire, militarism, and the fact poor people in our country are really left to fend for themselves. Those are the issues that I want to talk about the most. And then once we solve that really big issue, we can start to talk about the other things that divide us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like the nationalism, populism, anti-globalism, and anti-empire, there's so much overlap, even though people are classified as extreme right or extreme left, but it's almost like a circle. They meet on the other side, in a sense. They're not centrist, but they're meeting sort of on the other side. And it's something that I'm seeing all around the world. A on the show, we've talked to people in Italy and France and India, in Latin America, in America, and so forth. And it's an amazing global movement. It's the old categories make no sense, and in fact, it's almost as if it's there to purposely allow the elites to continue their old game.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just an interesting aside. You were talking about immigrants and immigration. I always assumed you were Latin American or even Venezuelan because of the first the first issue I saw you talk about was Venezuela. But if I'm not mistaken, you're of Indian origin. Is that right?
Yes, Parampil. My father is from Kerala.
Oh, really, really, really?
Hmm.
Okay, good, good, good. I have so many contacts with people from Kerala. It seems like there's always some
It's a very politically engaged state.
That's right, absolutely. And throughout a long history, engagement with the Roman Empire and the spice trade, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very, very interesting with the history of the Jews and the Christians and
Yep.
etc. Okay, very interesting. So is your family a political family?
Not professionally, but I think partially because my father is not from the United States, the conversations at home were always very international. And he cares about politics. He gets up and reads the papers from different parts. He'll always skim the headlines of CNN just to see what's going on, and then do his own digging on certain things that he's interested in. And so definitely that's what gave me my early interest in international affairs and politics, was wanting to keep up with him and talk with him and my family at home. But no, they're not politically engaged or active on a professional level.
Right, right, yeah. And I mean, Kerala, even in the Indian context, is an outlier in so many ways. It and Bengal were like the two communist states for so long, and whatnot. Yeah, there's a very, very, very lively and interesting intellectual life there. So yeah, so you're definitely carrying on that tradition. Excellent. Now you were telling me before the show in the interview form about your experience at I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Imjingak.
Imjingak.
Imjingak. Okay, close enough.
Close enough,
Imjingak
yeah.
in South Korea, and how that had an important influence on you in sort of turning your perspective around. Can you just elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, it's one of the strongest examples I have of I've had so many opportunities to travel the world and meet people who have been impacted directly by US policy in one way or another, whether that's being in Venezuela and having very good friends there who live under sanctions. And whenever I visit the country, I have to ask them, what do you need from here? What can I bring you? Things like Q-tips. My friend just had a baby last year, and I didn't end up getting to go to Venezuela, but I was maybe planning a trip, and he was asking for Q-tips, things that we take for granted here. Well, maybe not now with the coronavirus panic, but having a friend who is excluded and under a siege such as that, or friends in Gaza living under a very similar situation where I had the chance to go and spend time there. And it's almost like you can't believe that there's this place on earth where people exist in a cage and that you can go in and out, but they're there forever. Or Palestine overall, being in Hebron in the occupied West Bank and seeing Israeli settlers living on top, literally living on top of Palestinians who are in a cage. There's like a netting over the Palestinian streets because the settlers, the illegal settlers, throw bottles of piss and trash down on them below. Seeing things like that have always been the moments which impact me and say, look, this is because of US policy, what I'm seeing. This is because of my government. So how do I communicate that back to my people at home, and how do we change this? But in South Korea, at Imjingak, that was in some ways the most powerful, because it was something. Imjingak is as close as we were able to get during that trip to the border with North Korea, which has separated Korea artificially since the end of World War II. It really should be one nation. It is one nation. And when you go there, you see people looking in binoculars over at the north, and there's a big monument there where people who served in the Korean War come and write letters to their family members who are on the other side, who they've not been allowed to contact or see or have a conversation with or even know if they're still alive. And there was one man who I met there who was very, very old, probably in his 70s, late 70s. And it's the final scene of a documentary that I produced about Korea for RT, so people can watch it if they're curious. It's online. The documentary is called The Imposed Divide. But this man, he started crying. He spoke Korean with me, so I was dealing with a translator, and I asked him about what he was doing there, and he just started crying, like an older man, just completely broken down, with his daughter there who was standing by his side. And she said that he wanted to answer the question or talk about his experience, but he just couldn't, because when he started speaking, he was so overwhelmed with emotion because his entire family was in the north during the start of the Korean War, and he had never known if they'd even survived. And so he couldn't even control his emotion, and it was so painful because it wasn't just a typical interaction with someone who was impacted by U.S. policy in the moment or struggling under a blockade. This was something decades ago, a war and a separation that had been implemented 50 years ago, and it was still having that level of emotional impact on this one man that I met. But you can imagine the hundreds and thousands of people who visit that site every day, and those people are dying. They're not going to be here in 10 or 20 years. So they really have a small window to be reunited with their families, and you'd think it's such a common sense step that should be taken and that the United States could lead on this. Trump actually did try, and as a result of the thawing between the South and the North, there were some families that were reunited. But there's this song that plays constantly at Imjingak, which is just a tear-jerking ballad that was written about the separated families who haven't been reunited all of these decades on. And so because South Korea is essentially, and it would all be under the control of the North. Korea would have been a pro-China, China-allied independent state if the U.S. military had given up and not held the South as essentially a giant military base. And so that's just, to me, it was the clearest example that I've ever felt of how devastating and horrific U.S. policy, U.S. war policy can be on individual people all over the world. And again, it's just one example. The Palestinians, the Venezuelans, the Syrians I've met all have suffered similarly as a result, but that was a really powerful moment for me.
Yeah. And your documentary is called what again?
The Imposed Divide.
Right.
If you search Anya Parampil, Korea, Imposed Divide, I'm sure it will come up on YouTube.
Right. And you've done other documentaries as well, right? Like I think Palestine, Venezuela, Honduras, right?
Documentary-wise, Max and I produced a documentary about the Tamimi family in the West Bank.
Okay.
You might remember Ahed, the teenager who was arrested after her cousin had been blown in the head by an illegal occupying soldier in the West Bank, hit him in the head, I think, with a gas canister. And she was just mouthing off to a soldier, and they ended up arresting her and holding her for quite a while. And so there was a lot of attention brought on her case, and we kind of talked more about the struggle that her family has led in the West Bank. We also did a documentary about Prime Minister Netanyahu, which we called Prime or Crime Minister, because it was about the corruption scandal and cases faced by Netanyahu in 2017, which he was supposed to go on trial for officially this month. But of course, that court date has been delayed and pushed back due to the coronavirus outbreak in Israel or around the world. So those are two other documentaries I've done a lot of work about criminal justice in the United States as well. Right now, I'm working on a documentary about the struggle to protect the Venezuelan embassy, which was last year around this time when a bunch of anti-war activists in the U.S. in Washington put their bodies on the line to defend Venezuela's former embassy, which was invaded by U.S. forces in complete violation of international and diplomatic law. And now the final 4 people who were arrested for staying inside are facing trial. They were lucky a few weeks ago. Their case was declared a mistrial, but there's still a chance that the government will move ahead and prosecute them again, which is just outrageous.
Yeah.
But those are that's what I'm working on now, along with Red Line. So those are some of the projects.
And they're available on YouTube, is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You can always. I produce content regularly on the GrayZone YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But some of my other projects you can also find on RT America.
Right, because Red Lines is the show you host now, and and that is every day, is it?
There's no set schedule.
Right.
Aaron Mate, who produces another show for GrayZone, Pushback, and I kind of rotate. Well. And if we just decide to produce content when we get an idea for a guest or are able to put something together, usually 2 to 3 times a week. Right.
Good. Yeah. As you were talking about Korea and then Trump and North Korea, definitely. I mean, this is what I loved about Trump in 2016. I mean, I never thought I would see in my lifetime, right? I'm 51, right? So it's been a little while. And I would see an American president, criticize the FBI, the CIA, get up on stage in a debate with Jeb Bush and say, your brother lied.
Yeah.
And then he wants to be friends with Russia and China, and then he reached out his hand to North Korea. This was just incredible. And I mean, a lot of people give me a lot of heat for supporting those policies of Trump and Trump for that. I'm obviously he's disappointed me in many ways. Being president, or what he's not done and what he has done, but certainly, the principles in which he campaigned on, are just amazing. And this throws apart the whole left-right distinction again, right? And just like your personal friendship with Tucker Carlson, I think speaks to that as well. How people from all across the divides can find so many common issues. So let's take this to just your commentary on what's going on in the U.S. elections right now, even though the coronavirus thing is just putting everything into a kind of tailspin. But, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and, what was going on the Democratic side. What's your take on all of this?
I'm not surprised, based on what we saw in 2016, that the Democratic Party once again rigged its entire system in order to destroy the candidacy of Senator Bernie Sanders, who is someone that I am excited about. I've been following Bernie for years, even before he was someone that many of us learned about in 2016. I used to listen to him every week on the Thom Hartmann program, actually. He would call in every Thursday. And so I was excited about the prospects of a Sanders about him being the nominee, even though I didn't think it was likely. A lot of people in my social group, in my world, as we'll just keep saying the left because I don't know what else to say in media, really did believe that Sanders had a chance. And because he was the front runner, according to a lot of polls.
Yeah.
But I never underestimated the power of the elite in the Democratic Party. And so it was very interesting to see how they really, with the leadership of Obama, it was Obama behind the scenes making calls to Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and telling them that you need to drop out and endorse Biden. And I was surprised at how adept they were, how perfectly they planned it so that they could ride the wave of the South Carolina primary and then after Super Tuesday just declare Joe Biden the candidate. And I was also surprised. I knew that they weren't going to let Sanders be the nominee, but I wasn't sure which of the establishment candidates the party elite were going to decide should be the one. And I was shocked, honestly, that it was Joe Biden. He was probably one that I expected to be the consensus candidate the least, because it was very apparent to me that he can't even finish complete sentences.
That's right.
Early on. And then since he's emerged as the consensus candidate, as the nominee, it's just gotten even worse.
That's
he can't
right.
go a day without swearing at voters or even
Coughing in his hand.
appearing exactly that he doesn't even know where he is. Last week, I'm sure you saw the video when he gave this kind of acceptance address after a major voting day. And at the end, he just stared and looked into the camera without any gesture, or he looked completely lost on his face. And then his wife had to come in and like shuffle him off stage because he was just going to stand there. He'd completely forgotten where he was. And so it's clear to me at this point that Biden is the nominee. I'm very disappointed in how Sanders handled the very important period of time, I think, after Iowa, when that very suspicious app shadow was employed by the Democratic Party to count the vote. It was obvious by that point that even though Sanders had won the primary, that they were doing everything they could to obscure the fact that they won. And even you have to have serious questions about the vote when something that wrong is going with the app. So at that point, I think Sanders should have been rallying his supporters and speaking very clearly about this is a plan from the party elite to go Trump. Remember what Trump did to the Republican Party? He didn't win as someone who's going to shake up the Republican Party by playing by their rules. He called them out repeatedly. And Sanders is taking this mentality, we'll just keep our head up and win the next race. No, you won't.
Exactly.
And so
Joe Biden is my friend, you know?
Right. And then when they rolled out the RussiaGate attack against Sanders, and called him a Russian asset, or were suggesting to him that Russian bots were behind his campaign, he rolled over and accepted it. In fact, he introduced the RussiaGate narrative against himself during a debate. He said, if some of my supporters are being mean online, it might be because of Russian bots. That was a failing strategy. He played into the hand of the party elite, I would say. And so I don't have a lot of hope for him. I personally prefer Tulsi Gabbard. I think she does the best job of speaking about the issue that I think is the most important, which is ending these wars and tying that to the social programs that Sanders talks about, like healthcare and education. We can't get to that without addressing the empire first. And so that's what
I was speaking to Ann Coulter last week, and she said that if Bernie had the Democratic nomination, she might even consider voting for the Dems. I think
there are a lot of people who think that way.
Yeah, you know, and I'm with Tulsi even more, I think, than Bernie.
Yes, Tulsi, I agree. She has perfect cross appeal.
Yeah, you know, and I think a Bernie Tulsi ticket would have been, you know, devastating for Trump.
Unfortunately, I don't think the Sanders campaign would have been brave enough to bring her on. I mean, people were really disappointed when she endorsed Joe Biden last week, but it seems apparent based on, her brother made a post on Facebook saying that the Sanders campaign rejected their endorsement, which wouldn't surprise me. He deleted that post.
With the Russia bot thing, right? Because he would say that, you know, she's a Russian asset and he doesn't want to be tainted.
And you can't be a revolutionary and live in fear.
Exactly.
So I just think Sanders had a chance. He could have played it differently, but at this point we are stuck with Biden. I think primaries, conventions are all going to be canceled this year. They're not going to have a party convention. So they could do anything at the last minute. There are people suggesting that maybe maybe if Biden, and it's getting to seem that way, even if the elite realize, look, this man is just not gonna, I fear for him, honestly. When I see him, in his eyes, he looks like he might not even live until November. And I say that out of serious concern.
Yeah.
And if I were a member of his family, if I were his wife or any of his children, I would be doing everything I could to stop him.
Yeah.
Because you would think they would want him around, but I guess nobody cares about him. It's really, really
exactly
shocking.
he looks like he's suffering from dementia.
Yeah.
I don't believe that he was the first choice for being a establishment consensus candidate. I think that just happened by accident. I think they would have liked Buttigieg, or I don't think Klobuchar.
But they couldn't really run with the mayor of South Bend, Indiana.
Yeah. So they were trying other people. Like, I think Kamala Harris at first, I think they were really behind her, but because of Tulsi killed her.
Yeah, Tulsi killed her. And Tulsi was Bernie's attack dog. Bernie wouldn't attack anyone. And then she would really effectively take out these people who were threats to Sanders himself.
Yeah.
And so, that's the thanks that they give her.
Exactly.
Completely ignore her.
And I think that, so they're kind of left with Biden. They're pushing him. I don't think anybody thinks he can really win. And, Jimmy Dore, who I adore him, he keeps making this point, that the first order of business for the DNC is to make sure progressives don't capture the Democratic Party, and then maybe it's to defeat Trump. But they would rather lose to Trump than win with Sanders. Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
So where are you on the idea of a third party or another party, where are you on that issue?
I think in theory, I would love to see a viable third party emerge. And I do have respect for people like Jill Stein, who ran for the Green Party, on the Green Party ticket in 2016, and also the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the PSL. I know a lot of people around the world might not have heard about the party, but they may be aware of some of the programs and the individuals, the higher profile individuals that are kind of in media that are affiliated with it. And
that would be like whom?
Well, Eugene Puryear had a show called By Any Means Necessary on Sputnik Radio. They just launched their own media project, actually, which I would encourage people to find. But there's Mike Preisner, who works with Abby at the Empire Files, or Brian Becker, who's actually the founder of the Answer Coalition, which is this activism group. Whenever you see protests in the United States that are anti-war, especially over the last year, you see these yellow signs, whether it's in New York or DC or LA, and it's all from the Answer Coalition. They mobilize people all throughout the country, even in the South and the Midwest, to come out. And when there was the U.S. felt it was on the verge of war with Iran, they were able to mobilize thousands of people around the country. But as much faith or belief, like strong faith, I have in some of these individuals and the grassroots organizing that they have, the way our political system in the U.S. is designed is that it's almost impossible for a third party to emerge in a way where it can be included on the level of the Democratic and Republican Party and win a large sector of the population, or even get on the ballot in some states. They make it really difficult for third parties to do it. And so it would have to emerge in kind of I think a uniquely American situation, kind of with what we saw with Donald Trump, a celebrity, someone with a lot of interest behind them that's independent of the political system to come in and start something like that.
Because
or sweep the country. I think that's the only way.
Trump did not run as a Republican. He's basically like a third party that hostile takeover.
Yeah. I mean, if someone like Sanders now ran as a third-party candidate, I think it would make a big impact. But he won't do that because he's a Democrat. And so he's just shepherding people into the Democratic Party. But it can only come from someone like Sanders or Trump. If Trump had not won the Republican nomination and then he'd started a third party, it could have been enough excitement around him to force coverage of a third party or inclusion of a third party. Even someone on the flip side like Michael Bloomberg could run a third party and probably, because of all of his money, have an impact. But it's nice in theory, but we're going to have to be in kind of a revolutionary political moment for someone like that or something like that to emerge, which we might not be so far away from as a result of coronavirus and the way the elite in the Democratic Party are treating us.
Yeah, and I mean, and look at the way Donald Trump is sort of outflanking the left, even with his UBI and protection of renters and people with mortgages. Not even Obama.
Capitalism is forced to save itself at this stage. If it wants to survive, it's going to have to bail out individual people, even though it won't be enough. Sanders and Tulsi have even better proposals. But the Democrats, the party elite, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they've just been an embarrassment on this issue.
Yeah. Well, in kind of moving toward a close, your brand of journalism, it's very mission driven, obviously, and it's passion, driven by a passion for certain values and whatnot. So what would you say that it appears to me that you definitely have a message that you want to put out to the world. What would you say that is?
There are two messages. One is the message that I convey to people outside of the United States, where I've been, again, fortunate enough to travel to many places that are targets of U.S. imperial policy. And in those places and throughout the world, I like to remind people that there are individuals in the United States, large groups in the United States, even a movement in the United States, which rejects the policy of our government and understands that we as US citizens have more in common with people in Iran, people in Trinidad, people in Venezuela, people in Syria, people in Palestine, average people everywhere. We have more in common with them than we do with the elites of our country, and we understand that, and we have the same enemy, which are the ruling class, the banks, the industry, and the politicians they control in Washington, which have wreaked havoc on the rest of the world for decades. So what I want to tell people abroad is there are people who believe in international law, believe in diplomacy, believe in having respectful relations with other countries, not based in an imperialist mindset. And that we stand with you and that we will fight for you here in the belly of the beast. And then domestically, my message for people in the United States has always just been about informing them about the policies of our government and the impact it has on people abroad. And a lot of times people feel like they shouldn't care about, for example, people in Palestine, when people in the inner cities of the United States are suffering, don't have jobs, don't have healthcare, don't have education. And I understand that mentality. And so a big part of my message, the most important thing that I want to drive home for people in the States is that those issues, and again, this has been why I was excited about the candidacy of Tulsi Gabbard, because this is her message. Suffering in the United States is totally tied to our imperialist policy and our war policy abroad. And so it's really nice to talk about healthcare and education and all these nice things, but we really first have to talk about how do we rein in our military, how do we end this decades-long empire, which is already kind of expanding beyond its own capacity. It will collapse and it will be ugly on its own if we don't start having a serious conversation about it in the United States. How do we tackle it? How do we resist it? And we have to buck that mentality that our issues here, our struggles here are separate from the struggles of people abroad. They're completely connected. They're not something you can separate. And so that's the core of my message, I would say.
Right. And your personal journey and story, I think, is really amazing, especially, the point where you, on principle, you left, and you were unsure as to what your next step would be, and you didn't let the sort of careerism and money and those inducements take you off track. I mean, what would you recommend to young people today, listening to this podcast right now, and who are also interested in these issues and, want to sort of make their contribution? What would you recommend?
Well, I would emphasize what I said earlier, which is that you do not need a journalism school degree in order to go out into your communities and talk to people about what's happening and try to communicate it in a way that makes an impact in this country. One of the things that Max and I, and especially Max at the GrayZone, try to do is find young people constantly who are interested in issues, want to figure out how to learn and be investigative reporters or be field reporters. And we are living in an information war, right? I mean, the US government is very open about how it views media and as a weapon.
Yeah.
And so if it's a war, we need more soldiers on our side. We need more people who are willing to question mainstream narratives and put in the time and effort necessary to challenge it effectively. And so if you're sitting at home under quarantine and you're bored, try and think about ways that you can amplify the voices in your own communities who are impacted by the policies of our government. And don't be shy. We have Twitter, we have YouTube. You can put out content and you'd be surprised how quickly people will pay attention, because there is a hunger out there for people, for information like what you're putting out and that we put out at the GrayZone. That's what I found when I went on Tucker's show and got thousands of messages from people all over this country saying, finally, somebody says what I agree with. And there are people out there that are just dying for the information, that they're so lost. They know that they're lied to by the mainstream and corporate media. And so when they find something else, they're really excited and grateful. And so people shouldn't be afraid to try and do it on their own. It's not some glitzy, ritzy professional career that people should feel like they're excluded from, even though many in media would like it to be that way.
Yeah.
I think that it's a people's industry. It can be if we have enough people willing to commit themselves to it. And it's really exciting. It's really interesting to meet people in the United States and around the world who think like you, and you'll find that we are the majority. I believe that.
Absolutely. So, well, can you just tell us about maybe your plans in the next 5 years or so, either personally or even with the GrayZone or whatever? Do you have any? You said you have a documentary you're working on.
Yes, I'm working on a documentary about the Embassy Protection Collective.
Okay.
That should be out in a few months.
Okay.
And I am doing my show, Red Lines. I'm fortunate to have this studio in my basement, so even under quarantine, I can continue working. Honestly, if you would have asked me this question 3 months ago, I would have given you a completely different answer. Now I feel as though so much is in jeopardy, so much is... I don't know how long we're going to be dealing with this crisis, especially in the United States. I worry it's going to be a lot longer than it needs to be because we're not taking care of people. So things are going to get way worse before they get better. But I would have liked to, for example, this year we really wanted to go to Iran and do kind of similar work that we did in Venezuela on Iran. And now that kind of seems to be impossible. Yeah. I wanted to return to Syria to work on some projects there, and even a conference that I had been invited to there got canceled last year because of the protests in Lebanon, and now is been delayed again due to the coronavirus outbreak. So who knows what I'll be doing. I would like, in theory, to travel to more countries. I would love to visit Trinidad, for example, but who knows what's going to happen with coronavirus. But I can guarantee you that I'll be continuing my work the best I can from home.
Well, that's great. Now, I want to thank you not only for this interview, but really for all your work and your determination, your intelligence, your voice, your commitment. I wish you all the best and every success in your work ahead.
Thank you so much. You're so kind, and my best to you as well. Let's stay in touch and see where things take us over the next few months. It's so hard to have a prediction, and it seems like it's impossible to have plans even at this point. But maybe there will be some good to come out of people realizing that our system is not equipped to handle something like this, and so we need to make some changes.
Absolutely. Well, that's all for Independent Thought and Freedom this week. Please join us again. And in the meanwhile, make sure you subscribe, leave me a rating, like and share this podcast with your friends. Thanks, and bye for now.